Good afternoon. I'm here with my guest, classic poet fumbling with paper, Scott Ruescher.
Yep.
How are you, Scott?
I'm great, Doug. Thank you for having me.
And Scott is also going to be, we're going to be intimate pals because he's also going to be at the Newton Free Library tonight, right after the show.
Yes.
So,
Newton Free of Charge Library.
yeah, right.
We're gonna go on as twin brothers. You can see why.
All right. Scott Ruescher, I'll give you a brief bio, is the author of the book from the prolific press, Waiting for the Light to Change. He's the winner of the Able Muse Writers Prize.
Right Prize.
Right Prize.
Yeah.
The New England Poetry Club awarded him the prestigious Erika Mumford Prize for poetry. His work has appeared in such prestigious journals as Ploughshares, the Boston Phoenix, with Lloyd Schwartz was doing the poetry column.
Exactly. I wish he were still doing it.
Yeah. But you've also been in the Lyrical Somerville. That ain't
Well, there you go, man.
There you go. Right. So,
Don't
hopefully you'll be in the Ibbotson Street Press. I mean, the Ibbotson Street Magazine. Hopefully you'll send some stuff.
Yeah. I'm ready to do that.
He's an administrator of the Arts Education Program at Harvard University, and also teaches at the Boston University Prison Education Program.
Yep.
So, tell us, you're at Harvard and you're administrating the Arts Education Program. Maybe you can tell us a little about your work.
Oh, sure. I've worked at the Harvard Grad School of Ed. We call it the Ed School. Mm-hmm. For more years than I'd care to remember, for as many years as some of the students have been alive. Like
I know the feeling.
27 years.
Yeah.
We like to joke that all the students in our program turn 27 on October 15th or something, because it seems like they do.
Yeah.
So, but I've been the administrator of this program for 15 years. I'm working with my 16th cohort. It's a one-year master's program for educators from all kinds of artistic disciplines, so music educators, museum educators. You know, every museum has tucked away in the basement an education wing that hosts school buses full of kids and weekend gallery expeditions for city kids and whatnot. And spoken word people, we have spoken word poets working in the program. Working for nonprofit community arts centers like Zoomix in East Boston, Urbano in Jamaica Plain. Must be an equivalent in Somerville, but I'm not thinking of it right now.
Yeah, okay.
Actually, at least one of our graduates teaches violin at an El Sistema school in East Somerville, I think.
Wasn't there some controversy around El Sistema?
There was a controversy over El Sistema at New England Conservatory.
Yeah.
But apparently the press didn't get it right or something. It wasn't all that big a deal. El Sistema is a recognized, music education outfit that gets kids from underserved communities to work together.
It's based in Venezuela.
It comes from Venezuela, that's right.
Unfortunately.
Well, Venezuela is not in good shape, So Jose Abreu, I think his name is, he founded it many years ago.
Yeah.
And it's, like the LA Philharmonic conductor is from El Sistema in Caracas or something.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it's all over the country and people love it. I mean, it's sometimes questionable. Do you want to, are you going to take a group of Latin American kids and have them do Western European, Eurocentric classical music? Sometimes that seems kind of funny. Why aren't people encouraging them to do son and Ecuadorian folk music or wherever they're from?
Yeah.
But anyway, it's a good thing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, also, we were discussing Mar Barker, who started the EU prison education program.
Ma Barker, yes.
And you're involved in teaching in the prison. What prison do you teach in?
Yeah, so I've been in the BU prison education program for the same amount of time I've been administrator of the Arts in Education program, 15, 16 years. I've been bouncing back and forth. The BU program serves MCI Norfolk, which is a huge men's medium security prison in the Walpole, Norfolk area, right across the swamp from the prison formerly known as Walpole. It houses like 1,500 guys, medium security, a lot of lifers though, who are just living their life within the walls, and they've been there forever. And a lot of lifers who are in the college program, but also younger guys who might be doing 10 or 15 years or whatever. Anyway, so
I mean, how are they as poets? How's the experience?
it's amazing. It's an interesting mix of people. So you get a sort of mix of a lot of Latin American guys from places like Springfield and Lawrence and Lowell, whatever, mixed with sort of white working class guys. I would have to say. So you get this funny cultural mix, and African American guys from whatever, Dorchester, Roxbury. It's interesting to have them all together, and I'm trying to appeal to them all the time, trying to get them to use their own cultural material in whatever form they feel most comfortable with writing in poetry. So I'm doing poetry and short stories. Today, this morning, I had my class on Tuesday morning. We workshopped about 5 or 6 of their poems. And so there was a Langston Hughes emulation that was just an excellent little piece. There was a little nature poem by a guy who had been making fun of Robert Frost for always having horses in his poems or something. Why do you want to read that, man? What's with all these horses? Then he writes this beautiful little poem about a cabin with the moose, bears and deer. I forget what all the animals were, but they're all looking at the moon. Even the cabin is looking at the moon. I thought, this is beautiful.
Well, this is good to have an I mean, I've done poetry groups at McLean for over 30 years.
Yeah.
And I find it's a break for folks who are just getting into, psychotherapy groups,
Oh, yeah.
meditation groups, and so, again, in some ways they're imprisoned in a metaphorical sense.
Right.
Not like prison, of course, but it's good to get that humanistic, that spiritual sense.
Yeah, for sure. These guys they've worked hard to get into the college program. A lot of them came to prison without high school diplomas. One of my guys from Dominican Republic told me last week that he came to prison not knowing a word of English, basically, living in Lawrence or something, living in an enclosed Latin American community, no contact to mainstream English. And so there he is. Now he's still pretty rough. I mean, he's in the college program because he's a hard worker and a creative guy and likes to read and study. So he's just really interesting. And he turned in a poem last week called Charlatan. One of the other Spanish speakers said, "Charlatan, that's a Spanish word, charlatan," and he didn't know it was also used in English, charlatan.
Yeah.
So, and it's about this guy who's on the make who cheats everybody. It's funny having a guy who's been in prison for 20 years writing a poem about somebody who cheats all the time, because you think,
write what you know.
I
Right?
know.
Yeah.
And it was just an awesome poem, really. Misspellings and poorly punctuated, but well done.
You should have an anthology of the poets. Have you
I
ever-
should. Whenever I get around to doing that, I end up with a stack of poems and stories, and I look at it and I realize if the Department of Corrections ever read this thing, I'd be doing time.
Oh, yeah.
Because some of the best stuff has a pretty, street content to it. So.
No, it's
But
authentic. It's a raw. There's a quality of rawness that's.
Yeah, rawness is right. Yeah, like one of the stories the guys turned in a couple weeks ago was I asked him to write a first-person participant short story from somebody else's point of view.
Yeah.
He basically wrote a story featuring his girlfriend on the telephone complaining about him for like 4 pages.
Mm-hmm.
It starts out, "I never cared about his punk ass anyway."
Mm-hmm.
And it goes on, and she's talking to her girlfriend or sister about him. Really fantastic. You never heard the other side of the conversation, the same as in a movie where you see somebody on telephone and, "Oh, is that right? Oh, I understand." It was all like that for a whole. So anyway.
No, that's
Good
good.
stuff.
No, now, I was reading Beneath the Tobin Bridge. I experienced that, and I think it's particularly relevant these days. There's a sort of this bridge between two, the white and black,
and it is a bridge, the Tobin, yes.
And you focused on a colleague of yours running down the hall, I believe, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Can you tell me a bit about that poem?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, and thanks for putting it. I believe you put that in
the
Somerville.
Lyrical Somerville.
Lyrical
New York Times
Somerville.
of Somerville.
All right, thank you.
All right.
For years, I'm a little bit obsessed with social issues. It's probably part of the reason I like working in prison. I like to explore other communities, I guess you would say. And I had a friend, it's 1989, 1990, I worked with a then young woman. I was then maybe a young man. Dorchester native, veteran of the Metco program. She'd grown up in the hood, but went to school in Lincoln Sudbury or something. The Charles Stewart case happened at the time.
For people who don't remember, just tell us what Charles Stewart is.
Yeah, Charles Stewart. I could read the whole poem to you, but and you would get the whole story. But Charles Stewart was, I guess, white working class guy from Revere, who's how's it go? His wife was pregnant. They went to a birthing class at Brigham and Women's over off of Huntington Avenue, across from Mission Hill. He had fallen in love or become infatuated with a wealthy young woman who worked in the fur store. He worked in a fur store on Newberry Street. Classic class stuff.
He worked in some sort of fashion industry, didn't he? Yeah.
I think he worked at, I like to say it's called Caucus Fur.
Yeah.
I think it actually,
right.
I think it was. I think they closed after this case, but totally snobby Newberry Street high class stuff. He was like climbing into, upper middle class life after growing up in Revere and falling for this goddess. I'm sorry, I shouldn't be derogatory about her. I don't know who she was, but the cliches are so outrageous. It's hard not to make fun of it. But she was from like Dover, Sherburne, from
Horsey country.
Horsey country, yeah. And he thought he would get insurance money if he killed his wife. So brilliant thing to do. After birthing class at Brigham and Williams, he drove her up to a dead-end street in Mission Hill, shot his wife, shot himself, I think in the leg, I forget, to make it look like somebody else had done it, killed his wife, handed his gun to his brother Matthew, who actually just died in a Central Square homeless shelter like 2 years ago. Long story there. Whew. And then told the cops that some black guy did it. Some black guy held us up and killed my wife and shot me. So he had the Boston cops running after every guy on Mission Hill, every black man on Mission Hill with a record of some sort, and thought they had a guy named Willie Bennett, I think. They kind of apprehended him. He had a record. They thought he'd done it. Turns out a few weeks later, his brother Matthew, I think, under pressure, confessed.
So yes, so this is a case. So why did you feel compelled to write about it?
That's a good question. It's just these class and race divisions are troubling to me and fascinating to me. And the whole social makeup of Boston was included in this one story, White working class North Shore, horsey suburbs, inner city, black neighborhood, just all these things it was like a mythical story for Boston to me. Troubling. I hate to think of Boston as an awful place. I've lived here forever. But
like any city, it's got its problems.
It really does, yeah. It's become more and more international, multicultural. The Boston City Council just became majority people of color, I think. So
well, I was here. I remember when I was in college, I was here for the busing crisis.
That's when I moved here, yeah.
And so it was quite a divisive time.
Oh, man, that was rough, yeah. So I always wanted to write about this, and I could have done it in like a commentary in the Cambridge Community newspaper, or I could have worked it in. I I wrote for an online arts magazine. Somehow, maybe I could have worked it in there. But I wanted to write about it in a poem, and it hit me one day. Oh, my friend Regina is the one who told me that Charles Stewart has not only confessed, he's jumped off the Tobin Bridge. Like it.
And she was happy about it and angry.
Exactly. I mean, yeah, because she was sort of a representative victim of racism in Boston in a way. I mean, coming from Dorchester, seeing the trouble in the streets there, she was a representative. Sweet woman, wasn't like, didn't hate white people or anything like that, but it was so heinous.
Yeah.
So it was like her community had been subjected to this stereotyping and victimization by the Boston police. And so when that lifted, she came running down the hall. And so the poem describes her running down the hall to tell me about it. And it's a visual description of Regina running down the hall to my office.
Did Regina see the poem?
Regina saw the poem, yeah.
She liked it?
Yeah, I was so happy that she enjoyed it, yeah.
Great.
Thanks.
Now, Homecoming, it's sort of like, it's sort of like your Paradise Lost, a yearning for some simplicity and expulsion from the Garden of Eden. I mean, I'm comparing it to Milton. Well, you can't get better than that, right?
I'll take that.
But,
Blank verse, that's for me, yes.
Yeah. So what do you think?
Homecoming, yeah, there's a lot of...
And you were born in Ohio, right?
I'm from Central Ohio, yes, and that's a Central Ohio poem about the history. I'm kind of obsessed with historical stuff in general, social history of Boston, history of the South, history of Central Ohio. That poem's about, I think it's about being in a graveyard, in a pioneer graveyard in Central Ohio, imagining what it had been like before, 19th century agricultural, people just been there like 20 years or something. And, I paint a contrasting pictures of 19th century Central Ohio agricultural, quiet, rural, idyllic, even pre-Norman Rockwell.
So then you went, so you went from that sort of idyllic sort of setting and innocent setting to the academic environment that you're now in. What happens if you never...
Well, here's the thing, though. In that poem, Homecoming, I contrast the idyllic 19th century to the present day.
Yeah, with the parking lot. And,
suburbanization. There's a whole bunch of stuff in the book about this kind of thing. Like the title poem is similarly about a Central Ohio landscape.
Well, we can see in our own, the gentrification that's taken place. And I rarely recognize the downtown anymore. And Somerville's going, so it's a lot of these things.
I know.
But if you hadn't left Ohio, what do you think you would have been?
Well, what would I be doing? I would definitely not be living in that suburb, in those suburbs that I described there. Well, I don't think I would. Columbus, Ohio, which at the time when I was a kid in the 60s and stuff, it had Ohio State, and there was a lot of activity around there in Columbus, but not that much in the whole town. In fact, the suburbs of Columbus are still totally out to lunch on politically. I'm sorry. I don't mean to be judgmental, but it's Trump territory and gullible, like, I don't know. I don't want to talk about it. It gets me upset. But downtown Columbus is the hippest place going now. It's an incredible urban revival center. It's become, not exactly sure why, but a sort of gay capital of the Midwest. I mean, it's incredible. Like the neighborhoods my parents grew up in, which were kind of scrappy white working class neighborhoods, they're like the chicest places in town now. German Village, where some of my ancestors lived in the 19th century, totally scrappy peasant people, whatever. It is like the priciest. It's like Beacon Hill now or something.
Wow.
So would I be there? I might be living there. I love Columbus now. I go back all the time.
Yeah, certainly cheaper than here, I guess.
It is incredibly cheap. It is like a third the price, housing anyway,
Yeah. So, all right, so.
Yeah, thanks.
You've got about 10 minutes to read from your work.
Oh, my goodness.
And, so why don't you do that?
Okay, then. I thought I might read a Boston-based poem.
By the way, I was going to ask you,
yes.
you do use long lines. You don't strip down.
Do.
you don't strip down your
No,
verbiage.
I'm a
verbiage.
maximalist.
Yeah.
Yes. I'm fond of quoting Tony Hoagland,
Right.
who says on the back that I'm an evangelist for reality,
Okay.
declaiming its glitzy multitudinosity in long cinematic sentences.
It's a hard blurb, but it's a good one.
I
love the
know.
toys.
I was happy
Right.
to hear that. So, yeah, long sentences. Some of my poems are one sentence long.
Okay.
In fact, I might read one or two that are
Alright.
one sentence long. I have three poems about a character. I think I picture him as being somebody from Southie, classic kind of Boston Irish guy walking into Cambridge and going, "What's going on over here?" You know, this is another class division poem, I guess.
Yeah.
So
Although Southie ain't what it was. right?
that's true. Southie is something else now, but this is an old leftover.
Yeah.
It might be a little harsh, but I guess so.
It's fine with harshness.
Yeah, I know. What am I talking about?
My poetry is harsh too.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Yes, I want to hear about the moose running down Tom Ave. Shamrock is the name of this.
All right.
Now that I've had it up to here, I said to myself, assuming the identity of a downtrodden townie, now that I've had it completely, with flicking a perfect cylinder of light gray tobacco ash into the choppy charcoal water, and now that I am completely sick of seeing my stupid ass reflection in its ball cap fractured by the steel and silver fish scales that the stiff sea breeze makes of muted light on the river, and now that I am tired of closing my nose to the low tide brine and my green eyes to the smudged sun that dots like a lowercase I the sky-scraping insurance firm that has never been capitalized on by any one of my kind, I am thinking of walking away from Boston for good. Not to Ohio. From my potato-digging ancestors and all the crap they stood for, from the habit of clenching my freckled hands in the pockets of my faded black jeans, from my propensity for dangling a lucky strike from my lips as if it were James Dean's, and from my love of leering and snickering, sneering and leaning on the green filigree railing of the Longfellow Bridge, especially from crossing the Charles in a state of furious oblivion, I said to myself, continuing in the trajectory of the townie, on this bridge known as much for its salt shaker turrets as it is for the do-gooder poet the Brahmins named it for, turning my wind-burned back monogrammed with a Kelly green four-leaf clover on the white background of my Celtics jacket, from the bobbing lures of Boston that I used to hope to catch my South Boston blues with once, if only to throw them all back in.
So the speaker of the poem. Oh, you're not finished yet. I'm
No,
sorry.
yeah, you got it.
The speaker of the poem is from Southie. He's a Southie guy, but he seems to be rather sophisticated in his language and things like that. So is he sort of, revisiting or?
Well, actually, it's a mix of now that I've had it up to here, that's the Southie guy speaking, and then I said to myself, assuming the identity of a downtrodden townie. So I'm talking to myself and using the voice of the Southie guy at the same time.
Okay.
So yeah.
All right. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
That's how that works. One more?
You certainly have more than that time. You have 5 minutes.
Oh, okay, good.
For the sake of the tape, we just let you go and then yeah.
Oh, okay, good. Oh, sorry. There was one I was going to read. Can we edit this?
It's all right.
It's fine. It's cool. I see. I was going to read. Let me read the apology, 32, page 32. This is sort of like the Charles Stewart poem, only different. The apology takes place in Central Ohio. In that warped fragment of time it took to flash myself back from the 1920s to the present tense, I remembered not only that my sister had been talking to her husband on the phone in the parked car in front of the house that our mother used to live in when she was younger and lighter at heart, a house as white when you come right down to it as the president's home in Washington, but that we'd been talking before that from the rolled down windows of her shiny new car in view of the house's plywood door, bed sheet curtains, dented vinyl clapboarding, and barren front yard, to the current residence of 1496 Minnesota Avenue. The soft-looking but sad-seeming black woman of 50 and her apparently disabled son of 25 or 30, autistic, deaf and dumb, or dragged down schizophrenic, who were coming down the steps when we arrived. That we'd been too shy or too embarrassed by the obvious discrepancies of race and class to ask if they could show us the interior of the house, or even just the small backyard where our mother posed for a photograph under a loaded trellis of roses one day, with her sister and her ailing mother, who, in a dark summer dress, with a look of sad defiance on her face, 40 years before the neighborhood turned in the early 1960s, was just about to call it quits and perish from cancer of the breast. That all we'd managed to do before they got into their own dented green four-door Chrysler sedan and took off to meet the son's appointment, maybe with a doctor or a social worker, or to get to the supermarket and back before the rerun of Sanford and Sons had begun, was to explain that we'd stopped in front of the house to think about our late mother coming of age here in the 20s and 30s, when their own families were probably still sharecropping the cotton fields or living in the squalid black ghetto bottoms of the Mississippi's tributaries. And that in offering that information unsolicited to blank stares in this formerly white working-class neighborhood of Linden, an early streetcar suburb on the northeast side of Columbus between North High and the airport, that, like many such neighborhoods, after the migration of African Americans from the South, Mississippi and Alabama, the Carolinas and Georgia, Tennessee and Louisiana in the 40s and 50s, had long since become the kind of disenfranchised